Henry Louis Gates is chairman of the Department of Afro-American Studies at Harvard University. Since arriving at Harvard from Duke, he has set about to establish an intellectual dream team, and he is well on his way. In 1994, he lured philosopher Cornel West from Princeton. He lured William Julius Wilson from Chicago. Gates and West have joined to write The Future of the Race, examining the famous W.B. Du Bois essay, The Talented Tenth. Each is a best-selling author in their own right, and they are two of America's most popular intellectuals, and they are friends of this broadcast, so I'm very pleased to have them here. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Before we talk about this book, let me just talk about what in the world is going on at Harvard and the Department of Afro-American Studies. What are you trying to do? What are you doing? What's the goal?
Well, our goal, quite frankly, was to put together one of the most sophisticated assemblages of scholars of the African-American experience ever to be at one place, one time in the American Academy.
And you are on your way.
Well, we're getting there. We're getting there.
You got Cornel, you got William Julius Wilson, you've got
Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham. Leon Higginbotham.
Yeah.
They're there. Yeah. Anthony Appiah came with me from Duke.
Yes.
Most distinguished African intellectual in the world.
But it says something. You have to go to Duke and rob them of their professors. It says something about Duke, doesn't it?
I was at Duke.
I know. All right. So, but the goal is to do what? To change the face of Afro-American scholarship, or to change the face of the debate about Afro-Americans in our society?
Now, African-American scholarship has a long and distinguished history.
Right.
We very much see ourselves as being plugged into that tradition of noble, excellent scholarship. That's why we took Du Bois's essay, The Talented Tenth, and then riffed on it in our two takes at the end of the century. What does this mean for us?
We'll come to that in just a moment.
Sure. But I'm saying that notion of tradition is fundamental to us. It's not that we're new. You know, black people are always reinventing themselves. You know, you're colored, then you become a Negro, and then you become black, and then you become an Afro-American, then you become an African-American. And I tell my students, powerful people don't change the name every 10 years.
Yeah.
It's a sign of powerlessness, I think, if you pretend that everything you're doing is brand new and has no precedent, and it's a sign of insecurity. No, we see ourselves very much as extensions of a great tradition of black intellection, epitomized by people like Du Bois. But we also, to answer your question, see ourselves as blessed and privileged at a time when a huge percentage of the African-American community is suffering. And I think our task is to figure out how race and class produce their peculiar compounding effect at this time in America's history. At a time when we have the largest black middle class in history, fully a third of the black community is in the middle class. The black community, middle class has quadrupled since the day Dr. King was killed, yet fully one-third of our people are worse off than they were the day.
The underclass is growing exponentially.
That's right. Worse off than the day King was killed.
And here is my first question, but we move to the book and come back to the university. Do they know each other, the middle class, or have they become, in your words, uncoupled, so that there is no real connection between black underclass, I'll start with you, Cornel, and the black intellectuals, the black middle class, the people who've prospered?
Right. I mean, keep in mind that there's intellectuals among the black working class, black middle class, even black working poor, but we're talking about credentialized intellectuals. That's something else. But keep in mind, we can only make relative judgments. We can make relative judgments in regard to what it looked like under American apartheid, under Jim Crow, Jane Crow. Of course, the black middle class was there with the black working class and the black very, very poor. After 1965, as a result of the blood, sweat, and tears of those freedom fighters of various colors but disproportionately black, were able to break through the walls of American apartheid and create new opportunities, and hence the class divisions, class differentiations, as well as black middle class flight to suburbs, often black suburbs as opposed to white suburbs, but suburbs nevertheless. And so we do in fact have increasing tensions and frictions as well as distances. And that's also true into the generations, but I mean we don't want to
absolutely. More distance than we've ever had.
More distance than you ever had before.
Yeah, because of the end of residential segregation. You see, we were all
together because of segregation.
You got it.
With integration, people can go where their money will take them.
Right. If the law says all blacks shall or all blacks shan't, that means that the law treats all black people as a class. And it meant that you could not live in Scarsdale or White Plains or wherever it might be. You had to live uptown. And now you can live, if you have sufficient resources, pretty much where you want.
Okay. Du Bois believed, and he gave this famous lecture, and then later he he re-emphasized it or he updated it about the talented 10th. But in his judgment, he found it incapable of both being an American and being black, and so he went away to live a life of an expatriate. Yes?
No, indeed. Indeed. Boyce is the greatest black scholar produced in this country, yet he was still a child of his age. Deeply shaped by Victorian social criticism, very much like Thomas Carlyle's strong heroes or Matthew Arnold's disinterested aliens who represent the best and the brightest, who would uplift, refine, and in some ways even civilize the uncouth and the unrefined moaning masses. And what was great about that was this notion of service. What was wrong about that was the elitism. And so what we're trying to do is to reshape his understanding of what it is to be one who speaks for and with other persons, such that one does not view oneself as being over and above, but rather rendering service to others who are less advantaged.
How do the two of you, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to disagree with Cornel.
That's what I was going to say. How do you two of you differ? You took it.
Sure.
I'll just slide out of the way and tell you when time's up.
But also I think that we're concerned with, what does it mean to be a member of this crossover generation?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be a member of this new black middle class? We've always had classes in the black community, but never a class structure quite like this. Never, as my mama used to put it, blacks with as much white money as compared in the old days to having colored money, as she'd put it. What does that mean? And all sorts of anxiety, all sorts of angst ensues from this new class status. And as we write, the guilt of the survivor obtains as well.
Yeah, but I read you as not as saying that you avoid guilt. Well, you avoid guilt.
I think that the blackest thing that one could do, the blackest thing, as it were, that one could be, is a well-educated person. I do not feel guilty about my endowments, however limited they might be. I feel that it is a gift, and with that gift comes a certain responsibility. So what we try to do with our students, and we face this all the time, what we try to do with our students is to transform that guilt. That guilt's a powerful emotion. Freud said that it makes civilization work. I'd like what we try to do is take that guilt and transform it into an idea of ethical commitment and moral service to those less fortunate. And that's crucial.
To quote you, our goal is to provide solutions to the issues of race and class in America. Well, that's not the quote actually I wanted, but basically what you were saying is that it's important for black intellectuals, without to paraphrase it, at the same time as not lose sight of, but not feel guilty about the other side, those that have failed, and at the same time to explore that without and still take pride.
Sure,
you know?
Because we have examples. And we all know this painfully well.
Let me interrupt you and repeat that, because here I found it and I wrote it down.
Sure.
You need a way of speaking about black poverty that doesn't falsify the reality of black advancement and speak about the advancement in a way that doesn't distort the enduring realities of black poverty.
As we know painfully well, we have examples of very intelligent African-American adolescents and college-age people who intentionally fail or underachieve because they feel it's not black, quote unquote. There was a poll that was published in the Washington Post not long ago, and it was inner-city black teenagers in D.C., and it asked them to list things white. And among the items on that list were getting straight A's, speaking standard English, and visiting the Smithsonian.
I have had students on this broadcast, we explored that idea, who said they didn't do well because their colleagues, their black colleagues, would use it as a note of scorn to say you're trying to be like Whitey.
And so what we do in Afro-American studies is to show the basic connection between freedom and literacy that undergirds, the African-American literary tradition. I mean, in the slave narratives, Frederick Douglass equates mastering the ABCs and then the literacy of literature, as it were, the literacy of Western culture, with a freedom larger than physical freedom, a freedom of the mind, a metaphysical freedom.
That to me is the key, because we have to raise the question why it is that some of the younger brothers and sisters would not equate intellectual work with empowerment. We do want to accent intellectual creativity and originality, but we've got to connect it to ways in which people feel as if it can enrich and enhance their lives and their condition. When Brother Skip and I were growing up, the reason why we read so voraciously the Ellisons and the Morrisons, as well as the the Tolstoys and the Chekhovs, was because we were thoroughly convinced that to immerse ourselves into the life of the mind, we could contribute to the struggle for freedom, the wrestling with the various forms of human suffering. Once that's severed, then it becomes a plaything and becomes a life of its own associated with various...
But how does it become severed?
Well, it becomes severed when, in fact, there's not enough examples of intellectuals who are involved in various efforts to contribute, involved in various efforts to enhance the lives of persons, when they view intellectual achievement solely as a matter of social status, solely as a source of condescension and arrogance. Then, in fact, it's severed, and it no longer becomes attractive and appealing.
And it becomes severed when we lack the mentors in our neighborhood, in our families, in our communities, to say this is the most positive contribution that you can make to the civil rights struggle, to the race, toward the condition of black people, which is why we, in part, read so voraciously, and read so voraciously without guilt, you know, with enormous satisfaction. But to grow up to be Thurgood Marshall, I mean, you couldn't get better than that. That's what we were taught. Get all the education you can, boy, so no white man can take it away from you. I must have heard that a million times. That was what being black was all about. That was what being a Negro was all about. And now, that message is not, not being communicated.
Speaking of Thurgood Marshall, the late Supreme Court Justice, he assembled his own dream team when he was going to argue before the Supreme Court. I mean, was that part of a model of what you were trying to do at Harvard, in a sense, with that?
Oh, absolutely. I was thinking of not so much Thurgood Marshall's team, but Howard University, circa 1940, 1950.
Who was there in circa 1940?
Oh, man. Frazier, Abrams, Harris,
Alain Locke, Professor of philosophy,
the great Rhodes Scholar and black philosopher.
Charles Hamilton Houston, Thurgood Marshall.
Giants there at Howard.
And we can't tie their shoes, man.
Very much so.
It was a spectacular place to be. And why shouldn't we be part of a team? You see, the model before was that Cornel West would be at Princeton, and Anthony Appiah would be at Yale.
Right.
And Bill Wilson would be at Chicago. It's like Johnny Appleseed. You go there and integrate the school.
Yeah,
John Hope Franklin is a great example. Yeah, and then he was at the University of Chicago. He was at Brooklyn, chairman of the history department, 1957 Brooklyn College. Headlines in the New York Times. Only one on the block.
Yeah.
And our model was different. We looked at the 25 previous years in the development of African American studies and the integration in fairly significant numbers of persons of African descent in historically white institutions, and said, what's wrong with this model? And what's wrong is being isolated like that makes it more difficult to cross-pollinate each other, to feed on each other, to riff on each other. Man, every day of my life, I walk past, when I go into my office, I walk past offices of Anthony Appiah, Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, and Cornel West. By the time I get to my office, I'm pumped up. You know, it's like...
or maybe feeling awfully inferior,
yeah,
my God.
You got it. But that's the counterintuitive move.
That's a counterintuitive move?
The counterintuitive move is that you have to surround yourself by people who make you work harder, make you run faster. And what too many people have done is to surround themselves with dwarfs or with no one at all.
You're also doing, I know this from what you're creating, these people like Cornell, I assume in the theological seminary department up there, or whatever, the department of
the Divinity School.
The Divinity School.
Yeah.
And Higginbottom is going to be, what, affiliated also with
History
the History Department. And you've got
Kennedy School.
And her husband will be at Kennedy
School.
Kennedy School. So they're not only there at Afro-American Studies, but they also part of the faculty at the other
because
areas.
Part of the goal is to transform the culture of an institution like Harvard, and it's easier to do that if you're fighting at two sites rather than one.
What do you have in common with Louis Farrakhan?
Me? Well, both named Louis.
Yes, that's right. We don't call him Skip. What?
I think we both share a tremendous love of language.
Yeah.
A love of ideas, and I think we both share a tremendous compassion about the fate of African American people.
But you didn't attend the Million Man March.
No, but I didn't attend. I was going to go to the Million Man March. This is cheating in a way, but I was going to write about for the New Yorker.
Yeah.
So, you know, Cornell took a much more courageous moral stand.
Courageous because what?
Because he took a lot of flack for that.
Did you know you were going to take flack when you went down there?
Well, I figured I'd take some flack, but it wasn't a question of focusing on the flack.
Why did you go?
Well, I went mainly because we wanted to send a sign of hope, and we wanted to try to convince persons that black suffering, along with the suffering of other working people and poor people, ought to be much more at the center of the political as well as the national agenda. And we know we live in a world in which images actually have weight and gravity, and this is a powerful image of black humanity and black decency.
All those men and their sons and daughters there.
Absolutely
at
right.
that place at that time.
Absolutely.
Saying what?
Saying that we will not allow the present circumstances to dictate our conception of the future. And though there may not have been enough political criticism at the march, and we heard it from Jesse Jackson and a few others, there was an attempt to link the need for black spirituality, and by spirituality I mean conceiving of oneself as a subject with a sense of possibility.
Yeah.
But linking that spirituality to some motion and movement, and taking primarily the form of activism, joining organizations, churches, mosques, and so on.
You know, back to Du Bois, the thing that surprised me about what you say is that he put too much faith in education. How can you put too much faith in education, thinking about the issues that were talked about at the Million Man March?
Well, one is because education is not inherently humanizing. You don't simply immerse yourself in great texts and infer you're going to be a good person. We see Nazis, we see white supremacists, we see male supremacists, we see homophobes who are highly educated. Something else must go on, some transformation of will, some attempt to courageously wrestle with the evil inside of each and every one of us. That comes from character formation. That comes from virtue instilling activity, you see.
And that comes from family and role models and religion.
It comes from a variety of different social relations. Family is one at its best, church and mosque at its best, educational institutions at their best, media at its best. But none of these institutions have a monopoly on that character formation.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
And besides, Du Bois believed that the reason white people were racist was because they were ignorant. Ignorant meaning lacking knowledge of who the Negro really was. And so he set out to educate them. Basically, he said...
And he felt he failed to change them, therefore education didn't work?
No, he felt that the real causes of racism were economic.
Much deeper than just...
That's right. That they had to do with scarcity and the perception of scarcity, and that race stands as a mask or metaphor for deeper economic relationships.
Do you believe that?
Oh, absolutely.
I do too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cornel, do you?
I think it's deeply economic. I think it's even deeper than the economic. I think it's psychocultural and has to do with the fear of the other and anxiety of those who are defined as different. But the economic factor is a crucial one, no doubt.
The two of you, what do you argue, what do you differ the most about when you look at your shared place now on this faculty at Harvard, and you look at the roots and you write movingly of your experience at Yale and intellectual experience there? This is more of a personal essay by you, in your own, and you personalize your experience and why that was important for that generation at the time. But what do you two disagree about?
Well, one thing we disagree about is whether or not George Clinton is a superior artist to Donny Hathaway. I mean, and everybody knows that Donny Hathaway is superior.
Geniuses. But Coltrane's deeper than both of them.
Are you a Coltrane man like he is, or as much as he is?
No,
I mean, he's almost assumed a mantle of almost godship to you. Almost.
Well, no, he's not Jesus, but he's about the deepest thing to come out of North Carolina in America.
Well, that's signifying.
All right, but what do you really
North
differ?
Carolina here?
Yeah,
No, Charlie's on the list now. He's on the list.
he turned me on to Coltrane.
I love
genius.
Coltrane.
He really did.
I love
didn't really
Coltrane.
know Coltrane until
I love
And it's what he represents. It's the love, it's the deep wrestling with spirituality.
But what do you differ on Du Bois?
No, I think that where we differ, I'm not going to speak for Cornel,
Okay.
and he will speak for himself, but I believe that capitalism is, I started to say infinitely expandable, infinitely malleable. I think that it's not infinitely malleable, but I think that it is impressively flexible. And I think it will do, and this is good and bad what I'm about to say, it'll do anything to survive. I think Oppenheimer and company sat down in South Africa, looked at the facts and
Harry
said,
Oppenheimer.
That's right, and they said, apartheid's got to go because we're going to lose all our money.
Right.
We don't like these people. We don't like them any better than we did. We're going to let that guy, what's his name, out of jail, and we're going to change the society because we want our profits.
Yeah.
Now, I can work in a system like that. to me, what we then do is figure out where the pressure points are, how to manipulate it, how power is distributed, capture space. I heard Cornel describe that about my philosophy the other day, and it's absolutely right. I believe that we have to capture space. I'm a centrist. I'm I jokingly call him the clear-eyed progressive, which he is, and I'm
He's a socialist.
I am
He's a socialist.
I'm the messy, muddled middle. But that is my personality. I mean, my personality
You're the messy, muddled middle.
I am the...
He's a 3M guy, Cornel. Messy, muddled middle.
I see myself as a center left.
Yeah.
Me, one foot to the left, one. But that's where my personality is.
He and I have had this conversation. This is nothing new. That we've talked about social democracy as he believes it, and going to the world something in Berlin.
But I believe that we need to have forms of social service that express forms of compassion for our fellow human beings. I think it's disgusting that we live in a society where people live in the streets.
Okay, but and you believe in what? I mean,
you see, I'm a democratic experimentalist.
other than
see, I'm a radical Democrat. Now, because when you say socialist, oftentimes that scares people because they think of the ugly socialist past. But the point is that it is impossible to have a system like capitalism that's predicated on profit maximizing, that does not end up generating high levels of inequality of wealth without there being democratic countervailing forces. Now, I know we're going to live in a capitalist world for a long time to come, that I'm going to die in a capitalist world. But I'm going to keep track of the suffering in that world, no matter what. Suffering that in part has to do with inequality of wealth and power, has something to do with the disproportionate amount of wealth and power of corporate elites and banking.
Do you believe that, do you believe that other systems of government have done more for the mass of people than capitalism has?
I believe that at this present moment in the human adventure, that the virtues of capitalism have been to generate levels of productivity and technological innovation that has facilitated the creation of certain mass middle classes in North Atlantic societies. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the only alternative to emerge have been socialist ones, which have been repressive and regimenting when it comes to rights and liberties, but have been better when it comes to health care and education. Mm-hmm. So the question becomes, look, we've got these two systems. Both have deep flaws. One has completely failed because liberties and rights are precious. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why the Soviet world had to collapse, and rightly so. But that doesn't mean that prevailing global capitalist world doesn't have deep structural flaws. And let me say this, especially on Good Friday, I think one of the issues where you get a difference between Brother Skip and myself is that I am an unabashed, unashamed Christian. And by Christian, what I mean... Well, he's got deep spirituality, I think, but he tends to be much more improvisational, I think, when it comes to the spiritual.
Wait, stop. What's improvisation? You make it suit the moment?
No, not at all.
What does that mean?
I'm not
Is this sort of
a formal Christian. Do I believe in God? Yes. Am I a religious person? Yes. I just don't like, I wrote this recently, I just don't like to talk about it that much. But are you Buddhist? Are you more Confucian? Are you more Hindu? I'm more of a Christian. If I get sick, my father was detected, prostate cancer was diagnosed my father when he was 62. First thing I did was cry, as a matter of fact. The second thing, I went up to my bedroom, got down on my knees, and I prayed to God, and his son was Jesus, and he died on Good Friday and was resurrected on Easter. That is the God of my childhood. That's the God of my fathers, and that's the God I pray to in times of celebration and in times of desperation. But to say that one of my 3 or 4 principal identities is my religion would not be true. To say that about Cornel West would be true, and that's the difference.
Because see, I'm first and foremost a Christian. Mm-hmm. But by Christian, you see, is one who works through Chekhov, through Coltrane, through Toni Morrison, and says what? That the tragic comic character of the world is such that the suffering and the pain and the grief that sit at the center of it serve as the terrain upon which we must struggle, but preserve our compassion no matter what.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. I mean,
you don't have to be a Christian to make those kinds of claims, but it's my particular journey that lead me to arrive at those kind of claims.
When I raise the question of government, question of capitalism and economic structure, I was also leading to a notion of whether you two saw the role of government in questions of race the same or differently. Whether it is, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sure that we do. I mean, to me, see, we have to cast this in a slightly larger frame. Let's talk about the causes of poverty.
Right.
Or let's talk about the causes of the size of the middle class, okay? Causes of poverty are both structural and behavioral. And you can only deal with structural problems structurally. You need government intervention, you need certain entitlement programs, you need help, you know, you need jobs training. The problem of poverty is caused, this sounds tautological, but by the absence of jobs. How are we going to educate a workforce to enter a working class and then a middle class in a world economy, a highly technological global economy? That's the question that confronts us today. And the reason that the middle class is so large is because of affirmative action. Affirmative action made it possible for Cornell to go to Harvard, for me to go to Yale. We were qualified to go, but we would not have been admitted before because of strict racist quotas at Harvard and Yale and every other elite American institution. And so affirmative action for us was a wonderful thing because it lowered a barrier. It made it possible for us to be a player at the table. And so without government intervention, we wouldn't be here.
And what about the behavioral issue?
We need a moral, ethical revolution within the African American community. Let's be clear about that. No white racist makes a black person harm another black person or harm themselves. No white racist is responsible for the teenage pregnancy rate. The drug addiction. I mean, we can talk about forms of stress, but we were taught growing up that if we succumbed to the stress of white racism, that we as a people would be dead. And what we have to do is insist on a two-tiered approach simultaneously, the structural and the behavioral. To do one over the other means that no result will ensue.
In
Did
the
you
end,
disagree with me?
I
I asked
think
the question
in the
whether you
end, what
differ
holds
on
for
the
the
role
black
of government.
community holds for the national community as well. That the levels of cruelty, the levels of isolation and loneliness, the levels of disloyalty and cold-heartedness and mean-spiritedness shot through the larger society. We all stand in need of a fundamental moral awakening around public life where we view ourselves as citizens who want to participate in shaping the conditions of our own destiny.
Do you believe that the question of race in America, with its class dimension, is a question that unless we deal with it, it affects our survival?
No doubt about it.
Absolutely.
Race is the one issue that will bring down the curtain on American civilization.
And
James
how
Baldwin
and
said it.
why?
Because it will generate levels of balkanization and polarization that would make it difficult for us to communicate with one another and generate levels of conflict that result in levels of chaos and disorder that will bring the end
And
to
how
America.
close are we to that point in your judgment?
We do not know.
Skip?
We're still on the present course. We're certainly on the way.
I heard Hugh Price recently say that...
Head of the Urban League.
That's right. Not since the progressive era has American capitalism been so close to decivilizing itself. To me, race is important because it allows economic scarcity to manifest itself in a way that is difficult to treat, difficult to touch.
How is American capitalism decivilizing itself?
Well, meaning we have
downsizing?
No, yes, that the safety net, the social safety net, is being ripped apart by this contract for America and the Republican Congress. And 45% of African American...
Wait, you leave me. I mean, I'm slow, so you need to go, sort of go very
sure.
carefully with me. You understand.
And so,
wait a minute. No.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It's one thing to say, I mean, the American corporation is decivilizing our culture. It's another thing to look to the contract with America and whatever other issue you pointed to and say the problem with them eliminating the safety net. That seems to me to be government action on the one hand, not corporate action.
No, but they're part and parcel of the same picture.
Why?
Well, because you need government intervention for Social Security is a government agency, not an idea that came from the corporate sector. We need Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, and I think affirmative action programs.
Right.
We need a sophisticated, healthy welfare system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you've read the Contract for America, many of these programs are candidates for the dustbin of history.
But also those Republicans will say we have suggested one welfare reform proposal after the other, which had been vetoed by the administration.
Yeah, it's being unacceptable, it's being too cruel.
But
You say hooray for the administration. They should have vetoed it.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it was unacceptable as a change in the present welfare policy.
Right. I don't like the present welfare policy, but I want it tied to job creation.
But there's a fundamental point, I think, that Brother Skip was getting at, namely that the conservative agenda of the Republican Party is a pro-corporate agenda to the degree to which it puts the welfare and well-being of corporations, especially those at the higher levels of that corporation, over the plight and predicament of working people and poor people. There's no doubt the moral indifference to poor people in that contract is one that links very directly the corporate interest to the Republican Party. Not all corporate elites, many corporate elites are critical of it.
So a corporate executive comes to you and says, essential to the economic survival of my company in a highly competitive global economy is to downsize, to reduce my employee count in order to be more competitive. You say to him, don't do it, I'd rather you be less competitive? Or do you say, fine, go ahead and do what's necessary to be competitive, but make sure you show some sensitivity and some humanism about the plight of those people who you no longer are going to employ? Which do you say?
I say two things. I say,
you just say, big brother gonna get you.
No, not at all, because I'm speaking as a human being. Both of us are fallen human beings, right? I say two things. I say the difference between short-term success and long-term success.
Yeah.
And there is the issue of fairness in terms of loyalty within your corporation. If you're increasing your salaries of CEOs at the same time you're downsizing, then you're violating a principle of fairness. If you're going to focus on profits for the next 2 years and don't invest in the skills of your workers, then 15 years you'll still be out of business.
Brother Cornel's been studying up on this.
Well, for me, I'm concerned with what happens to workers after they are fired, or after they are, euphemistically downsized or made redundant or whatever the phrase might be. What mechanism, what programs do we have for relocating them, for giving them a stake once again in the system? Because let's face it, workers are going to continue to be removed because this vision, which was more like the Japanese model of corporate capitalism until very, very recently, which you just described, is, I don't think, not on the horizon of the American economy. So what are we going to do with all these people? And right now, there doesn't seem to me to be very much compassion or sympathy or even reason at work in the treatment of people who are removed from their positions, who are fired, who are downsized. And we need to do that.
What would you have, either as an issue of corporate responsibility or as an issue of government responsibility, be done?
Both. I think we have to presume that the life of a worker will mean that she or he will probably be in 4 or 5 different venues for major segments of their lives. How do we anticipate that? By allowing them to retool, re-educate themselves so that they can be viable parts of the economy. Training, education, mobility. Improvisation. We have to have a much more improvisatory model of a worker's life as a worker than we've ever had before. The only model we have now is you are hired, you are fired.
That will only be in place when we have a strong enough either trade union movement or institutional leverage on behalf of workers, so we have a civic conversation between those workers and management.
Is it fair to say that you as the chairman of the Department of Afro-American Studies at Harvard University, believe it is incumbent on you in the gathering of these high-powered intellectuals to provide in the public debate solutions to the critical questions of race and class in our country?
Absolutely. Incumbent upon us as a team. I mean, they're not playing out anyone's agenda. We're trying to produce a common agenda. You see, one of the reasons that we need groups like this, think tanks like this, is that no one has solutions to the problems that we've been talking about.
Why is that?
Because no model predicted the results, let's say, that we've been describing.
We've got a lot of smart people in America. Come on.
Yeah, but we had a model of race-based oppression.
We may not have smart politics.
We had a model of race-based oppression that was not sensitive enough to the way that race and economics come together.
It's not smart politics.
Yes, but even in our scholarship, and we need now to figure out, to do hard-headed studies of where we are as an economy, as a country, as a society, as an ethnic group, and figure out what we do to produce the world that we want. I don't want to live in a society where 45% of all black children live at or beneath the poverty line. There's something wrong with that society. And I want to be part of a group of people. I can't do it by myself. But one of the things that I like to do in the capture space metaphor is to build institutions. I want to help to build this institution. I want to see it endowed so it outlives Cornel West and William Julius Wilson and me. And so that other people can take up the mantle, because it's a long, hard struggle to solve these problems.
And he is the grand institution builder at this particular moment, not just in the Black Academy, but in the American Academy as a whole. And it does
the grand what?
The grand institution builder.
How long do you have to do this? And I mean, the urgency of the crisis in America to deal with these kinds of issues is clear. You know, when do we expect action?
Well, you can't. I mean, the first thing,
ideas that can be mobilized.
You can't. We're going to start right away, but you can't rush deliberation. One of the problems, I think, about the relationship between scholarship and public policy is that it's overnighters. We used to call them at Yale overnighters. You know, what are you doing tonight? Well, I'm writing my checkoff paper for the whole semester, which is due at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. You cannot solve problems of homophobia, anti-Semitism, racism, classism overnight. And you need people who have sufficient leisure, and this is crucial, sufficient leisure to think.
Leisure is not what you have, Skip.
No, because he has discipline. That's very important.
But I'm trying to help create leisure for other people. I mean, you know, I just want to point the way. I want to create the space, be part of the creation of the space, so other people can thrive in that space.
How do you?
I'm reading that.
Cornel and I have had a long conversation on this broadcast about how he sees himself and about the lure to, you know, before he left Princeton to come to you and to Harvard and all of that. We've had these discussions. How do you see yourself? I mean, do you see yourself as an intellectual? Do you see yourself as a journalist? Do you see yourself as an institutional builder? Do you see yourself as all of those things?
Yes, all those things. I love to think of myself as a writer, but I love doing the long pieces for the New Yorker. And I like writing for the Times and the New Republic and anybody else who publishes me.
But also you, and so would all of us. But also you think that it's important to get those yourself and ideas out there in these publications because of the influence it has. And also on distinguished television programs like this one.
The distinguished.
The most distinguished.
No, but seriously.
You're the man, Charlie.
No. I'm not the man. Who is the man?
In more ways than one. But I've always, I think in a way, any intellectual is entrepreneurial. If you have an idea and you see that idea through to a material reality, to me, that's the definition of an entrepreneur. And you have an idea and you actualize it, as to use a bad word. You make it become material in some way. So we all partake of this spirit. And in my case, I had an idea, or I've often had ideas, and from my analysis of African American history, I've realized that we have very few endowed institutions. We have not captured enough space. We run around living hand to mouth. And what we need is to live off the interests like Harvard University and Yale University and the great elite institutions in this country. And that is what I want to be part of a group effort to create. And I want to do it in terms of a think tank.
Okay. And it's doable in your judgment.
It's doable.
To create the institution, clearly, but to achieve the goals of the institution. The collection of people is obviously doable. The endowment is doable and is there. Harvard is there. It gives you the cover to do it.
And we can't stress too much how important that is. I mean, having a president and a dean like Neil Rudenstein and Jeremy Knowles that believe in Afro-American studies as being one of the most important enterprises within a university. This is not a situation matched throughout the American Academy.
Well,
exactly right.
To make it more direct, you point out that 5 others failed because they did not have the administration support that
Absolutely.
you now have.
Without a doubt.
And is it unique? I mean, you've rated Princeton and Chicago, and places you cited have one sort of outstanding black scholar.
Chicago's got a lot more.
I know,
but
I mean,
you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, is the same thing going? Is it all going to be a dream team at Harvard, and nothing going on?
Oh no,
A lot of top-rate scholars, black studies departments,
you're gonna
and
take
so
all the
forth
shine
around
away
the country. No, our aim is to create a particular center that can then radiate both possibilities, influence, frameworks to be criticized in other centers. But when you get one center that is on the move, creating tremendous motion and momentum, it cannot but help these other centers. And that's part and parcel of Brother Skip's vision. I think it's a grand vision.
It's happened already. After Harvard mounted their initiative in Afro-American Studies, Columbia mounted their initiative. University of Chicago is doing work to get more scholars of African-American studies there. It's crucial that it happen at a lot of places, and it is happening in a lot of places.
Let me just speak to this issue, too, though. It is back to what is central, it seems to me. It is that, as you said, the black middle class has grown, but the underclass has grown as well.
Right.
Issues of poverty, issues of that surround the issues of children born into single-parent families.
Children having children.
Children, exactly. Children has increased exponentially, and some of the prophecy of Daniel Moynihan looks alarmingly close to reality. Is the black middle class, with all of its talent, speaking, connecting with the underclass in a real way? Do you know each other? Do you talk to each other? Is there dialogue? Or is it left to those with the oratorical skills of Louis Farrakhan and others without criticizing or, you know?
Well, it's true that we have...
or to a certain level of what we might call people who understand deeply the language of the street.
We still share elements of a common culture without a doubt. I mean, there are things that just, whatever you see them recognize, you say, that's just part of black culture. It's a way, whether it's a style of dress or a notion of color, a notion of spontaneity, improvisation, a love of music, a relationship to certain forms of cuisine, kinds of wit and
all
humor.
of which I share, so maybe...
That's part of your southern roots.
But I've been looking at you, Charles. Maybe a little touch of the tar brush back there.
I got a lot of black in him, like every white American. We all think, as Ellison and Al Murray point out.
That's true. Might be.
But to say that racism has an impact upon my life in exactly the same way as it does the life of a black homeless person, or a household in which there is 2 or 3 generations of welfare recipients or unmarried parents, is not the same thing.
Of course it's not, and you recognize that.
Sure.
Clearly you do, and you know that, I mean, the bountiful opportunities you have are very different.
Of course.
And part of the opportunities that the other person doesn't have has to do with skin color and that kind of thing, and yet you have a straight ahead path. That has to do with talent and a lot of other things.
And
so
luck.
does Cornel. And luck, sure. And timing and a lot of other things. And opportunity was there, and you took advantage of it, and you were able to maximize that opportunity. But I'm still intrigued by the notion of where the connect takes place beyond just culture. Sure, we share. I mean, how can you not share the genius of Duke Ellington? Wherever you are, you know, but do you share? I mean, you know what I'm trying to ask is where's the connect there between the underclass and the middle class, or, you know, what will? And you said it was uncoupled. What will couple it back? I mean, I think that's crucial.
Well,
it seems to me.
That's a crucial challenge. I mean, historically, there's been certain institutional sites that brought these various groups together, be it in churches, be it in lodges, being in civic associations, and with the class division, we've seen divisions increasing within those internal black institutions.
Right.
But we have to keep in mind that, one, the growth of the black middle class is not to be taken for granted. There's declining middle class prosperity in the country as a whole, that we may experience declining black middle class prosperity as well. The vast majority of black people in America are working class people, right? They're not in the middle class, and they're not in the so-called underclass. They're on the edge of poverty.
No, much well
That's
said.
right.
Yeah,
You
it's a
see,
very
they're
important
not
point
in
to
the
make.
middle class.
No,
So
you're right. You bet.
we've got that third crucial
Yeah.
sector, and they oftentimes were moving back and forth. They can move up to a lower middle class, get pushed back again, and then you've got the difficulty of any institutional stability among people who have such scarce resources. That's true for poor people in general. That's true for white poor brothers and sisters in Appalachia. It's true for black poor brothers and sisters here in Harlem.
I think that, just to add to that just a bit, I think that the point that you're suggesting is that one's identification is rapidly becoming as determined or affected by class as it was under segregation, as it was by race. And that's true. You have different identities, multiple affiliations, and that's the way it always has been.
But I'm also, that's true, and I'm asking where is the responsibility? Not the guilt, but the responsibility.
Right, right. But keep in mind, though, it's got to be a civic...
And you raised that question.
That's right.
Sure.
It's got to be a civic and moral responsibility. See, our argument is not the black middle class ought to help the black poor because of racial identity. It's much deeper than that. It's that we have a moral obligation to those who are less well off.
Out of humanism.
Out of ethical ideals, out of moral principles, and precisely because those black persons who suffer tend to be pushed to the margins, they ought to be given attention.
That's right.
You see, and this is true for whites and blacks and browns right across the board. This is very much a moral argument as opposed to simply a racial one, though the bond that we make will manifest itself in oftentimes a racial form because so many black folk, disproportionately speaking, are suffering.
Does the black church, whatever its denomination in America, have the influence it used to have? Is it as powerful as a shaper of ideas and thought and morality?
I asked Cornel. Oh, I heard
church in general is...
You remember when we were talking about the Million Man March? Cornel, it was Sunday night, and I knew that I couldn't go. And I called Cornel. He was at the hotel, and I said, "You going to speak tomorrow?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Well, good luck, man. I mean, the whole world's going to be watching. Brother's going to be up there. It's a great moment, right?" And I just want to tell him I was right there with him. Because he's my man.
Go to it.
And I said, I just heard the Colin Powell's not going to be there. And I talked to him, and he happened to call me. And so I said, "So you're not going to be there?" He said, "Look, this thing is really going to take off." He said, "I've been out there on this book tour, and everybody in the black community is talking about this Million Man March." He said, "Tomorrow, man, a zillion people are going to hit D.C." He said, "The only thing wrong with it is too bad that Farrakhan called it." So, and the next day, of course, on CBS Morning News, he denounced the march for that reason. And I said to Cornel, could anybody else have called for a Million Man March and gotten 1 million men to go? And he said, sure. I said, who? He said, the Baptist Church.
You get 14 million black Baptists if they were organized in that way. We should keep in mind, though.
Well, but I rest my case, though, is whether people are speaking to each other and whether the institutions are doing what they ought to. If, in fact, the black church could have, the Baptist church could have done that, or why didn't they do it? I mean, and Cornel, I mean, Farrakhan, to his credit, said that. Look, he said, I'm not appointing myself the message. Nobody was doing this. I stepped forward to do it, and this is the result.
And of course, 61% of the black brothers who did attend the march were Christians. So they came from the pew to the march.
Right.
You see.
These weren't Muslims.
And I think you're right, though. We have to give Mr. Louis Farrakhan credit for having the vision to call the march, that his concern for black suffering is such that he's going to engage in a variety of different kind of strategies. The question becomes, what do those of us who are part of the legacy of Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer have to say in relation to the same set of issues that he's trying to deal with?
One of the most amazing things that I'm trying to deal with, because I'm about to interview Farrakhan, is why you would be so successful. The greatest moment of this guy's political life was the Million Man March. I mean, I hated the speech because I thought it was too long and rambling. It should have been 20 minutes long and, you know, smoking. And he should have offered to atone. He should have said, I know that we all need to atone because I'm the greatest sinner of all, and I am here to atone in front of the whole world. You know, I atone for homophobia, I atone for misogyny, I atone for my anti-Semitism. That would have been a brilliant move. But without that even, it still was a brilliant power move, pulling off the Million Man March. So, why then follow it with this trip, which made even people who were sympathetic to Farrakhan in the Afrocentric movement, Malefi Asante, Hakeem Madhubuti, you know, take, as I understand it, you told me, I interviewed Malefi Asante myself, they said, we found this trip deeply problematical. And why he would do that, I have no idea.
Do you have any idea, Cornel?
Yeah, I think I have some inkling. That is to say that when you look at the history of the career of Mr. Louis Farrakhan, that he is a free black man who does what he wants. And what he wants to do oftentimes falls far outside of what a variety of other persons who themselves are worthy critics would expect. Now, I like the freedom that he has. I criticize oftentimes the content of what he does, you see. But it means that it makes it very difficult for him to be a leader who has a structure of accountability. Now, I'm a Democrat. I believe in structures of accountability, and that's the reason why I criticize. But I think that that he likes to launch out and engage in a variety of different kind of activities without that accountability, and therefore he oftentimes falls into these traps.
I can't wait to
this time.
Yeah, he sure did. And I think the exercise of independence has some restraint by the implementation of wisdom, which failed him on this case, it seems to me.
It was a bad day.
Yeah, it was a bad trip day, wasn't it?
No, but I mean, I think we also have to keep in mind that there are certain elements in his ideology that are deeply conservative. He believes in them, and he speaks on them. And when he calls for Islamic unity, radical Democrats are going to call it into question because it hides and conceals suffering in those societies.
Here's what I want to get at. We've almost...
Yes.
We're over time almost. It is the notion of, as we approach, and all of us approach, the seriousness of race in America, both its class derivation and otherwise, as a crucial issue that we have to engage in the debate and hope new ideas will come forward from Harvard University and other universities and other politicians with a newfound will to discuss it. Within the African American community, can you today have a full discussion of issues with both criticism and awareness of history?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I think that we are...
That's crucial.
I think that we all are aware that no one person or no one ideology or no one group of people has the solution to our problems. Secondly, I think we're all united in wanting to solve the problems. And I think that we know that now that what we used to call the one nigger syndrome is dead. That is, there's not one power broker in the United States, not in any of the venues of power in America. There are lots of people of color who are functioning in lots of arenas, and so we don't need to kill each other anymore, which was required of the racist system in the old days.
I got to do one last thing here, because this week, the loss of Ron Brown.
It's terrible.
And Hayward Burns and Carl Stokes.
Other people, Carl Stokes died of cancer, or I guess it was cancer, in Cleveland, 68.
Absolutely.
But Ron Brown specifically because flags fly at half-mast in America today.
Right.
Oh, I loved Ron. I mean, I love I only met him one time, but I love the idea of Ron Brown. I love the idea of someone so comfortable in his culture, so deeply rooted in an African-American tradition, yet he was comfortable as a citizen of the world. Where did he die? Did he die in Africa? Did he die in Harlem? He died in Bosnia, trying to build bridges in Bosnia. That's a beautiful metaphor for me of the relationship between the particular and the universal.
Trying to help American business and help Bosnia.
Absolutely.
That'll make you a capitalist, Cornel.
No, not that, but I tell you this, though, his deep sense of citizenship, his deep commitment to public interest and common good, however we may interpret it in conflicting ways, moved me deeply. Not only that, but he was just a decent human being. He really tried to keep track of the humanity of other people. And I knew him for a number of years when he was chairperson, Democratic National Committee. And you could revel in his humanity, even given our commonality in some of our disagreements, and came to love the brother very much.
Henry Louis Gates, Jr., Cornel West, The Future of the Race, a new book that they have jointly written. and they are jointly members of the faculty at Harvard University, and it's been a pleasure to have them on this broadcast for this discussion of important issues that we all face, black and white, looking at where we take this country, all of us. Thank you, Cornel. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure, though.
Thank you, buddy.
Always.
Thank you.
Great.
Enjoyed it. The book is The Future of the Race. Thank you for joining us.